You should put in a disclaimer in our video saying that we're idiots and that the gameplay sucks because our IQs are both 71.
So first of all, shout out to Jaden Wellner for making our banner for our
Yeah,
channel and
that
our
was fucking
profile
awesome.
icon. It's super sweet. I really enjoy it.
Me too.
Uh, I really suck at that sort of stuff, and so originally I was like, I just want it to be fucking Gintama's font, and I'm an idiot and I had no idea how to do it. And so I messaged him like, Jaden, please help. And then I think like 10 minutes later he gave me that, and I was like, oh.
Jeez. Wow.
It was a lot better than anything I could have done.
Okay, so should we start talking about the thing?
Yeah, what are we talking about today?
Oh, we're talking about Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt. That's the second thing on Scruffy's list. So
I'm super excited to talk about this album.
really,
Yeah, the second time I listened to it, I just loved it.
yeah.
I loved almost everything about it. It was so emotional. I wrote a shit ton of stuff for notes as I was listening to it today.
Yeah.
And I tried really
I
hard
mean,
to interpret every single song as something.
if you've heard the backstory to the album, you'll understand why it's so emotional and sad and so different from kind of the rest of his albums. The rest of his albums are kind of like nonsensical, fun sorts of things, or they have more of that air to them. Not absolutely everything, but much of his other output. And then this album, it just has no. It has way less quirkiness than is usual for Robert Wyatt.
I believe I know the story.
Mm-hmm.
His band just disbanded, his first band, or second band? Because he's in like two of them I was reading about.
He was in Soft Machine.
Soft Machine and then the Mole Men or something?
Matching Mole.
Matching Mole. And I believe Matching Mole just broke up.
Yeah.
And they were at like a party, and he literally just fell out of the third story.
Yeah, and then he was paralyzed from the waist down. So if you ever see him in interviews nowadays, he's in a wheelchair.
I did read that some people do claim, or apparently there was an interview with him where he had half the songs already done.
I've heard claims. People dispute this because it's a kind of a controversial claim to claim that he just had it all written already, or had some of it written already. Given that the accident kind of happened before its release. So it's a little bit controversial in some people's minds to claim that it was all done. I've heard he claims that it was all composed, not just partly.
Oh.
And then I've heard people be very skeptical of that. I think it might have been composed in terms of like what my theory is that he had it composed in terms of like a outline, maybe lyrical, maybe like some of the musical themes that were going to go into it, but then during its execution that he came up with a lot of ideas and kind of inserted them willy-nilly to make the album a lot more desolate and sad. And
the album was very good. Like, my favorite song was actually the second one, A Last Straw.
The Astra.
I don't know what it is about these really old like 70s albums, but they all seem to have extremely awesome bass lines.
Oh yeah. That one has the most memorable bass line probably. But the third song has a pretty good kind of almost bossa nova bass line as well. But
the third song was The Little Red Riding Hood Hits the Road.
Little Red Riding Hood Hits the Road. That's the one with all the trumpets. And that has for a long time been my favorite song on the album.
That song is interesting. The beginning of it reminded me a lot of when an orchestra is tuning up. They're just all kind of playing whatever so that you can get ready.
Yeah.
I really liked the first song. The second song was my favorite. They both had themes of like going into the sea and falling in love, and I thought
The
that was
second,
weird.
the second song might be the wateriest sounding song ever written.
Mhm.
It's like water the song is how I kind of view it. Yeah, that one's very unique. I love that song. I like most of the songs on this album. The one that kind of I've had to warm to is the fourth song because I love the third song. It brings a lot of momentum to it. And the one I've had to warm to is Alaphib,
Yeah, those the
which I've had to
last
grow to appreciate. But
yeah the last like I'd almost say half of the album was kind of tough for me to get into.
hmm just because it's slower and like
Well, so first I was trying to first listen to the song and discern what I liked about it, and then try to listen to the lyrics to try to think of what I like, think about what the song meant.
yeah,
Because that's what we talked about last time was we had really almost no idea what Trout Mask Replica was about.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's like a correct interpretation. I think this album lyrically is much more straightforward than Trout Mask.
If you listen to the lyrics for the last 3 or 4 songs, they're completely nonsensical.
I guess.
You get it's just like knit knit pop pop.
Oh, that part. Yeah, I mean, he has parts of it that are nonsensical, but Trout Mask is almost entirely. I really like the finale to Rock Bottom. Might have my favorite part in the song when he's repeating like "Don't you see them? Don't you see them?" and all the synthesizers are going crazy and the drums going crazy.
Oh, the synthesizer was awesome. I actually wrote that down as when the
It's one of the few works that use a synthesizer like actually really well.
mhm.
Synthesizers typically to me, especially those types of synthesizers, can either be used to neutral effect, are usually used to either neutral effect or like really, really corny sounding.
Mhm.
But he implements them really, really well, which is one of the other surprising things about this album.
Really loved the synthesizer. That was my main talking point about the first song was it immediately starts with this really really pretty synthesizer. I just
Yeah,
loved it.
and then when he also it becomes even prettier. I think when he's just kind of like going up and down with his voice, kind of just with the synthesizer, not non-lyrically, just kind of moving up and down with his voice. That's a extremely beautiful part. All done with synthesizers that usually aren't used to that good of effect. Um,
His voice was the hardest thing for me to get used to, actually.
yeah, it's not traditionally good, so it's very hard to get used to. But it fits the album very well. It fits his music.
It does.
And I have trouble talking about this album a little bit too because I'm a guy who likes to pinpoint concrete influences, and I use genres as kind of a crutch for it. And when you look up the genre of this album, it's prog, and
Really?
prog has it's a prog album. I mean, synthesizers are very heavily used in prog, and he was part of groups that were considered prog rock. And it has some jazzy elements, but the problem with just saying, "Oh, it's a prog album and it is from the Canterbury scene." Well, prog rock is kind of a really, really vague umbrella term to begin with,
Mhm.
and Canterbury scene doesn't help specify it much because all Canterbury scene is prog that was made by a small group of musicians in Canterbury, England. So it's not really helpful. It's like it's described primarily by two umbrella terms, and then when you by ear try to dictate, okay, prog rock is mostly just rock music that implements heavy synthesizers, heavy classical and jazz influence, and it falls along a certain line of musicians as well. But it's all very concretely, nothing seems quite right to point to as its influence. Whereas when we were talking about Trout Mask Replica, that was easy because you had all the avant-garde and free jazz, all the blues, and it was very obvious, kind of all stuck out. And with this album, sure, there's jazz influence, and sure, there's, some vaguely proggy things about it, but then it's so non-characteristic. It doesn't seem to, it seems actually very, very unique, like a gem almost.
I'm so glad that it was unique without having to resort so much into Squidward core.
Has a little bit.
It does. I even wrote that down.
Is it the fifth track where it has like just a little light warbling of a clarinet or something?
Yeah, it does. And, I was almost really upset about it because I actually loved this album quite a bit.
Yeah. And it's not too bad though. It's just like a little whimper. It's just to convey like some kind of whimper or something. It's not to like make you puke like Trout Mask Replica's Squidward core is trying to like out extreme jazz musicians and how unpleasant you can make a woodwind solo. And it's just for artistic effect. Yeah, and the album is deceptively, like when you're listening to it for the first time, you miss all of these details that are in the album. Is another thing about it. The soundscape is so lush with different little things, and he does so many little experimental tricks, just like really, really subtle things, and like they're hard to describe.
So one thing about this album that you'll be interested, maybe you'll just completely be like, God, you're so stupid.
Go ahead.
I was listening to it, and at one point the album goes, it talks about being a hedgehog, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like an Evangelion when they have the hedgehog dilemma, second episode, or maybe it's the third one, I can't remember exactly. And I think it's the same song, it just ends with We're Not Alone, which is the title for the second Evangelion movie. You Are Not Alone. And I was like, oh my god.
His work was obviously intentionally prefiguring Evangelion. He had it already all written up.
So I immediately thought like, oh my god, did this album like inspire some Evangelion stuff? And so I went looking, and no one said that at all.
Is it Hedgehog that he references?
Pretty early on, he just says like something about being a hedgehog.
Yes, me and the hedgehog.
Yeah, and he's totally talking about the girl.
Yes, me and the hedgehog, we bursting the tires all day as we rolled on the highway towards the setting sun.
At first I was like, there's no way, because this is like 20 years old, but it's totally possible, because Hideo full-on took influence from American culture to make that film, or to make any of that.
I'd be psyched if there was if you could find Hideaki Anno saying something about this album.
Oh, that'd be so awesome.
Someone says here, for a literal interpretation, it's a song about animals, namely moles and hedgehogs that are ran over in roads by cars, and perhaps ironically the guilt and pain feeling such an event inflicts over drivers who run over them.
I also got, once I got thinking about Evangelion, I couldn't stop thinking about it.
So all your connections are esoteric ones to Evangelion?
Sort of, yeah, because I was listening to, it was once they started getting completely nonsensical, I just completely started thinking about, this is how Shinji felt, just had no idea what was going on, didn't know how to feel.
Okay, now that's a stretch.
It started getting really stretchy, but I just couldn't get the thought out of my head, but I could totally feel the emotion of the album was definitely loss.
Oh, yeah.
He had a loved one and almost just lost them completely. That's how it felt to me, at least.
And the songs, there are actually two pairs of similarly titled songs. One is Little Red Riding Hood Hit the Road, the other is Little Red Robin Hood. And then the Elifib and Elifi, and I think warping of his wife's name, I think. she's colloquially called Alfie.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't understand that aspect of the album. It's like I listened to the album and then I just listened to it again, except only the back half. Because
Yeah.
there was Alafib, and then immediately after it was Alibib? Alibi?
Alafib is first, I thought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Alibi.
his wife is Alfreda Benj, and I think he calls her Alfie as a term of endearment. So yeah, that's kind of dedicated to his wife, and then those have the lyrics probably most about loss.
The whole album is about loss, but the accident didn't involve his wife. It just involved him.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of like a love album completely, but it was inspired by him hurting himself.
So during the gibberish of the lyrics, he occasionally says, "Ella feed my larder," and I remember looking up what a larder was just because it appeared in this album, and it says it's a room or large cupboard for storing food. So maybe he's referring to his wife as his like life source or something, like his sustenance, like life sustenance or something. So it's not completely nonsensical.
It felt nonsensical without knowing the backstory.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably supposed to do next time. It's probably like an inside thing between him and his wife, I guess. Maybe he felt inadequate or something in his marriage before or something.
They actually got married, I believe, on the day it was released.
Really?
Yeah, I believe that's how that story goes.
It's not that I know completely nothing about the musical context, but this can be researched in like 5 minutes, so I'm not sure if I'll say it, but yeah, I'll go ahead and say it. So prog rock is just kind of, it's rock music predominantly coming out of Britain and partly inspired by Frank Zappa, to be honest, where rock music and you kind of transfigure it with classical and especially jazz influences. And so the popular early releases would be like Frank Zappa's releases could be characterized as avant-prog. King Crimson and the Court of the Crimson King is prog music, etc., etc. Right, so that's the really basic stuff. And in the late 1960s, a little later, something called Canterbury scene started coming to the forefront, and probably actually the largest figures in the Canterbury scene probably were Soft Machine. And you listen to their third album, it could almost be described as kind of like a jazz fusion, and almost pure jazz, and a lot of synthesizers and things like that. Like a synthesizer being used as a sit-in for a jazz piano is like a big mainstay of prog music, and that's why Wyatt used it, because he was influenced by those communities. But anyways, yeah, and then Canterbury, all Canterbury is prog music that was produced in Canterbury. There's literally nothing else to it. So there's Soft Machine, there's Gong, which we'll probably end up talking about a little bit. Gong made more of like space rocky type of stuff. And Canterbury scene liked to use free jazz, and they kind of had like a distinctive sense of humor in their albums. Their sense of humor is called Dadaistic. If you Google images, if you do a Google image search for Dadaistic art, you'll see that it's kind of just like absurdist art. So Dadaistic just means kind of like absurd. So they're characterized by kind of like a quirky, absurd sense of humor. Free jazz influence, and then all of the things that went into prog, and it comes from the town of Canterbury. So
in the Court of the Crimson King is one of my favorite albums.
That's one of the golden age kind of albums of prog rock. Yeah, that was maybe the first, besides Zappa's albums, that was maybe the first major release of British prog. And it's the most famous release of British prog. Oh, no, that's not true. Pink Floyd's 70s output are the most famous releases of British prog. Yeah, they're the first major, highly recognized outputs of prog. And then Canterbury scene are bands like Soft Machine, Caravan. Caravan is actually probably the earliest Canterbury scene band. Kevin Ayers, who we might end up talking about a little more, depending on how far this podcast goes. Yeah, Wyatt himself, obviously. Wyatt was actually involved. Wyatt had actually released a solo album before he parted ways with Soft Machine. The End of an Ear was kind of... Did you listen to End of an Ear?
Because I did not. I was...
My game plan for finding stuff is YouTube, because it's just right there. It's just easier. And then Spotify, because that's also kind of right there. And then the Mew Archive.
Yeah, I didn't listen to that album. I listened to his most recent stuff.
Yeah.
Which was 2014 or 15, I believe. And then he had an album out in 2000.
I haven't even listened that far. His latest album I've listened to is Sleep, which I think was 97, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm not adequately prepared. But oh well.
I also listened to an album while I was looking stuff up on him, because I felt like I needed to do that. There was this term called Wyatting that I found.
Oh yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Where it comes from going onto a jukebox and playing really bad at music to annoy everybody else.
Yeah.
And specifically, what I was reading was specifically for his album. I don't remember the name. It was like Distande?
Donde Stan.
And I did listen to some of that album, and I didn't immediately see why people wouldn't like it. But then once I got later into it, I was like, yeah, I can see it.
If you really like this album, I could see if you like other Canterbury scene albums.
That would be good.
I guess Gong, probably, maybe Kevin Ayers. Mike Oldfield. Have you ever heard the theme to The Exorcist? Like those bells?
I think I have. I can't recall it like this exact moment.
Yeah, but the theme, the kind of creepy theme to The Exorcist is actually from a Canterbury scene album by Mike Oldfield called Tubular Bells. That's also Canterbury.
Wyatt seemed like a really awesome person.
Yeah, if you watch his interviews, he's very likable, at least just through his interviews, is what I found about him. Very kind, sort of soft-spoken, good sense of humor. Yeah, he's a very likable musician. Kind of the opposite of Beefheart, almost, in that respect. Just very respectful and...
So we talked about his previous bands, Soft Machine and the Matching Mole.
Oh, one thing I love about his album names at times is when he'll often make puns out of the names. Like, The End of an Ear is just a twisting of The End of an Era.
Nice.
Yeah, and then on Rock Bottom, he kind of just twists, like, Little Red Riding Hood hit the road, Little Red Robin Hood hit the road. I think he just came up with those titles because they don't really have anything to do with the content, the lyrical contents.
He does almost say rock bottom in one of the songs. He's referring to the girl, whoever, his current wife or whatever, and he says, "You're sitting there with your rocky bottom." He's
Yeah.
referring to her butt.
That's the last straw. Ruth is stranger than Richard. Truth is stranger than fiction. Oh, and the album title Donde Están, that's actually like pairing two Spanish words together. It's Donde Están. And
Well-
Donde Están I think it means where are they? And he does all these puns and stuff like that. And then, or like kind of just twisting, not puns, just kind of twisting the words. And then obviously Alaphib and Alaphi are kind of twisting Alfie, which is the term of endearment for his wife. But then my favorite one, okay, he was in Soft Machine. And if you translate Soft Machine into French, it's Machine Moye, or something like that. And he was in a band called Matching Mole, which is basically twisting the French translation of Soft Machine.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
That is pretty good. I really like that kind of stuff.
The Alaphib, isn't it just a life?
Possibly.
One thing we forgot to mention during the story is when he fell from the window and went to the hospital, it was said that he wrote the songs as if he was in a trance, and he was so appreciative that he could still do something while in the hospital. And that was write music songs.
Yeah. I don't know any of that. Like, again, people dispute when it was even written, or how it was written, or whatever. I'd have to see where these claims are coming from.
I tried to look it up, actually. I was Googling interviews of him, but I could not find any interview where he said he wrote the songs beforehand, and maybe I just suck at Googling.
Maybe it's in a magazine interview, because I've heard that claim too. He said in an interview that he had written it all beforehand. Well, what interview?
Yeah.
I have no clue.
I checked the YouTube comments of the video, because I like to do that. I like to read the comments.
Yeah.
And all of the comments were positive. I didn't see a single bad comment. They were all, this album is super emotional, it's probably the best album of the 20th century. The only one I wrote down was, it was a pretty simple sentence. Give me a link to download or I kill everyone.
Kill everyone. Yeah.
Yep, that was good.
That's the best comment on that video. But Nick Mason of Pink Floyd actually produced the album.
Yes, he did. He's the drummer for Pink Floyd, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been a big Pink Floyd head, so...
Yep, he's the drummer.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because Robert Wyatt was the drummer for Soft Machine. When I was looking up what all Wyatt did for the album, it was everything but the bass, which I thought was kind of funny.
Who does the bass?
I don't know.
Can Nick Mason... Oh, Richard Sinclair.
I don't know who that is.
I'm just looking at the credits to the album, like on Rate Your Music. Richard Sinclair was the drummer. Apparently has a lot of guests. He's the bass player for, not the drummer, he's the bass player for Caravan, is originally who were, and Caravan's just kind of an earlier Canterbury scene. Let's see, is Steve Cox in anything? Steve Cox, no, he's just some rando. Dick Palmer, is he the engineer for anything else? No. Alfred avenges his wife. Laurie Allen played for Gong. Hugh Hopper, I've heard Hugh Hopper's name. Hugh Hopper was a member of Soft Machine, I think. Yeah, so Hugh Hopper was a bass player for Soft Machine beforehand. so he helped as well. Trumpet player was Mungezi Feza. Oh, Mike Oldfield was on the guitar as well. So the guy who wrote Tubular Bells. I think he plays the guitar for Alapib, like the really slow kind of ballady, soft guitar for Alapib is played by Mike Oldfield. Yeah, that's all I have to say with the credits.
I got the impression that he thought his lover was ugly.
I think he's probably just. I mean, I think he's probably just making fun. But...
He just like kept calling them like sperm whale and
a baby sperm whale.
Yeah, Rocky Bottom.
Porpoise.
I was like, what
Rocky
the hell?
Bottom. It's probably just giving his fiance shit.
That's funny. Oh, the last song at the end, I think it was like the last 2 minutes, got really weird.
Oh yeah, the guy, that's actually not Robert Wyatt. That's actually someone else vocalizing over like an accordion type thing. Or it's not an accordion, I think it's like strings of some sort.
I just found it very strange.
Yeah, I love that ending. Because that's actually the last song's actually very musically and lyrically intense. Because if you read the lyric, it's about, like, he gives the imagery of, like, dead moles being eaten up by worms and birds in collapsed tunnels in a heavy rain. So it's very vivid, extremely dark imagery. And if you know anything, like his philosophical animal is kind of like the mole, right? Because matching mole, he talks about moles and and then he's like a mole. Then he likens his wife to a hedgehog. He's talking about moles like getting eaten and just being dead and in imploded tunnels and in heavy downpouring rain and stuff like that. And it's like, wow, he's not doing so well when he wrote this. And then all of a sudden, this like accordion sounding thing goes up, and this guy in like heavy Cockney, I fight with the handle of my little brown broom. Just like, all right.
Yeah, it was so weird. I wonder if it was supposed to be like him accepting the loss or something. I might be trying to read into the lyrics too much.
That's always possible. You never know what could have been going on with these types of weird guys writing lyrics like this. I don't know. And then my one of my favorite parts of the album is actually the very, very end with that creepy like giggle. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like the very, very like literally last second where he just lets out a kiddish giggle.
I don't think I paid too much attention to it. I'm gonna have to listen to it again after the podcast and really.
Oh, you don't have to listen after the podcast. It's literally the last second. Like, go to that album last 5 seconds, play the last 5 seconds, and you'll hear it.
In Little Red Riding Hood Hit the Road, at about 4 minutes, or at least that's when I noticed it, there's something in the background that makes the sound as if the track is playing backwards.
I think the track is playing backwards.
Really?
Or at least sub-tracks of the tracks are playing backwards. Like, I think the vocals definitely play backwards. Yeah.
That was really confusing for a bit when it sounded like it.
There's that, yeah, I understand what it is. It's that modification of cadence that you can just it's being played backwards. Like, it's like a...
Yep,
like,
that's it
like
exactly.
Kind of a slurpier It's like the reverb comes first before the like staccato in like when someone's doing percussion. So
Hmm.
backwards, it's kind of like someone slurping something up, as opposed to someone hitting something, and then there's a reverb. It's the reverb first, and then it's all kind of sucked up into a hit, like a punctured hit. So because you can definitely tell when percussion is being done backwards.
Why do you think he did that?
It beats me, man. This is why I like drawing a little bit more concrete inferences, even though my inferences are already not that concrete. There's a lot of hand waving into suggesting that, oh, this is free jazz influence. Like, who knows already with that? Let alone why an extremely complex guy like Robert Wyatt decided to do some extremely seemingly random thing in his song.
It was so weird. It was weirder that I didn't notice it until way, way through the song.
Yeah, I mean, I think he transitions to it like under your nose a little bit. Like all of a sudden a lot of the tracking is going reversed. And you're like, oh, when did that happen? And same with the vocal delivery being reversed. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really weird aspect of the album because I said this a little bit ago when it felt like I listened to the full album and then half of it played again, but it was almost like I listened to half the album and then the album played backwards and then I listened to it forwards again. It's really weird. It was a really weird feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love this album. I mostly like it because it can't easily be characterized or just shoved into a genre categorization, except for very broad, large umbrella base genres that are kind of poorly defined, anyways. Um, it's a gem. It's like finding a diamond, kind of. And you know that it really hasn't kind of been repeated. Whereas Beefheart's themes and concepts have been repeated all over the place. You can't really point to an album like, oh, this sounds like Robert Wyatt because, or Rock Bottom, because there's not too much that emulates that as this album has closely. So that's kind of nice about it too, is that nobody has emulated it. Um, what else? I think that the one problem I talked about with Trot Mask Replica is that it seemed to be getting a little bit repetitive by the end.
Hmm.
In this album, every song is very distinct. I mean, there's the same general theme, and it kind of has a consistent sound, but it's not so monotonous. He keeps it kind of varied up. Like each song is very distinctive from the other ones, and they're all extreme. They're all extremely creative. Um, Whereas other albums kind of seem to repeat themselves. And I think this album is one of those few albums that actually works as an album. It's not merely it's a different experience listening to the entire thing than it is just to say, oh, I like this song, so I'm going to take it and put it in a playlist. If I listen to stuff from Rock Bottom, I'm unlikely to just listen to it in isolation. If
Hmm.
that makes sense. I like listening to the whole album when it's Rock Bottom. It seems like a cohesive work, which you can't really say about a lot of albums.
The whole album was an experience for sure.
Yeah, and the experience is contingent upon the prior songs having been experienced too. It's like you can't remove it from its context and have it be nearly as cohesive. It's just different if you listen to them individually than if you actually listen to them, knowing having your brain be shaped by the prior songs. Most albums can't say that. That's an aspect I really like about this album. It's one of those.
This album did have a little bit of an unfair advantage, because it's not actually an album, it's an LP. It's really short.
LPs are the long version.
EP?
Like that. Yeah, EPs are the short version. Yeah. This isn't an EP. This is an LP. It's almost 40 minutes. I mean, it's an LP.
It's pretty short.
It's pretty short. I mean, the short end for albums. I've seen albums that are 29 minutes. When we talk about Desert Shore by Nico, that's an LP, which is an album. Like, that's the same thing. And that is 29 minutes. So if you're beyond a half hour, you have it. That's kind of like the nether region. Is 25 minutes to half hour. Is it an EP or is it an LP? That's probably just determined by how many tracks do you have at that point. If you only have a couple of tracks, then it would be an EP. Wyatt has other EPs, like the Animals film, Short Break, and stuff like that. And Rock Bottom is not an EP. It's way too long to be an EP. So but it is nice. I guess its succinctness kind of works in its favor. If albums, I tend to be not a fan of albums that are overlong. So coming in right at 39 minutes is that's just about right for me. Because I'm an idiot and I don't have a very good attention span.
It is only 6 songs, I believe.
Yes, and it's few songs. What I kind of like is albums that are a little shorter, and then but the songs are fewer and kind of a little bit longer, so that the actual individual songs have time to develop properly. And Trout Mask Replica is the exact opposite here too. I mean, Trout Mask Replica is usually 2.5 minute tracks. There's 28 of them. It's 80 minutes long. And I like Trout Mask Replica. I love listening to it on occasion. But I get so tired at the end because it's just oh my god. The songs are so short and they're so haphazard. There's no logical rhyme or reason to their ordering. Trout Mask Replica is an album that you can just pick your favorite songs and just kind of go. Whereas I prefer actually kind of the strategy taken by Rock Bottom, which is have it shorter, have it sub 40 minute, and have a few really, really well thought out songs that develop properly in one continuous flow and really sort of explore all of the ideas related to that song and give yourself air and kind of room to breathe to kind of explore all the ideas that are possible with the current song that you have, and then have fewer songs making the album come in at a shorter total time. I like that strategy about it better. Usually that it's in between Trout Mask Replica and Rock Bottom. Another example of that would be Wish You Were Here.
Ooh, that's such a good album.
Yeah, 5 songs, longer tracks, and then all of the ideas relevant to our sport. And that is a really good album, is Wish You Were Here. And I really like that about that album. It seems like everything's explored kind of properly, and also its brevity allows me to not be exhausted at the end of the album.
Is that album on this list?
That album is not on this list. Garufi gives that a 7 out of 10. Which means he likes it. That means a 7 out of 10 would be in the minority of albums that he gives. So that means he likes it. And he rates things based off of what he perceives as innovation.
There were parts where the drums got really good. Like, I could tell that he was the main drummer of bands, because they were excellent.
One of my favorite drum parts is at the end of, before the goofy guy comes in at the end of the album with the accordion sounding stuff. The drums at that point are amazing, where he just goes nuts, and it's incredible.
I mentioned this a little bit ago when I was talking about the Evangelion shit, but I want to talk about it a little bit more in depth. One of the songs had this lyric that it almost stopped and it just said, "We're not alone," and I thought that was one of the best lyrics I've ever heard. I really enjoyed that part.
That would be Sea Song. Yeah, that would be Sea Song.
I love
it. It sounds like he's gonna say something else, but then it just like cuts off and decides not to say it. Is that the last lyric delivered in that song?
I believe so.
Before he goes off on his up and down kind of experimental vocals.
I believe so.
Yeah, yep, we're not alone.
It made me think about other lyrics that were really powerful, and you always bring up the one from Pink Floyd. What song is that?
Oh, one of my favorite lyrics ever is actually in, I think it's Have a Cigar. They're talking about, like, going in and sitting down with these, like, bigwigs in the music industry, and kind of like these naive producers asking which one's Pink.
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, if you're a kid or something that's just looking up Pink Floyd for the first time, you know, it kind of sounds like a name. And I did that as a kid, except it was with, I would mix up, I thought Led Zeppelin must be a person, because I knew Van Halen was the last name of people. So I was like, okay, Van Halen's like a guitar player. Led Zeppelin must be like, I thought Led Zeppelin was, I thought Robert Plant. Like when I saw Robert Plant in like a Led Zeppelin album advertisement, I thought I would think, okay, that guy's Led Zeppelin. I didn't even realize that it was, you know, just the vocalist. It was, and so it was kind of funny. They're kind of playing off that, like these hopelessly ignorant, like executives in the music industry asking, okay, which one of you is Pink Floyd?
I actually have a similar story. There is a band called Billy Talent. It is a Canadian punk band that I really love. And I thought one of them was named Billy. I don't think any of them are.
Oh, it just happened recently. We were going over Traumask Replica, and you were wondering about the band Henry Cow.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because it was so similar to Henry Cowell. And I was like, yeah, that's actually a band. That's the other one too. Except that one occurred as an adult. Whenever I would see Henry Cow, I would assume, oh, that's just some experimental artist. And I had even listened to a couple of Henry Cow albums, but I hadn't like looked up Henry Cow yet. So I was like, oh yeah, Henry Cow is a pretty good composer or whatever. Then I look it up. There is not a Henry Cow in the band. The band is just Henry Cow. Yeah, but this is like really, really tangential. Because it's talking about a Pink Floyd lyric that's talking about all this.
That's perfectly fine. We originally were going to bring up the talk of genres, which you've actually already talked about a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you don't have a music theoretic way to describe the music that's being played, whatever type of music, whether it's traditional or some notation, some precise notation for describing exactly what's going on, it's hard to actually tell exactly what influences it has or what it's exactly doing. And then all you can do is describe things in terms of visceral kind of feeling, which is really vague, or the crutch of genres, which is kind of based off of just how it viscerally sounds, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, it kind of sounds like this. It must be influenced in such and such a genre, right? And those are a good crutch until you come across something like as complicated as Rock Bottom, where then your crutch is gone, and now you have to describe things more precisely. And I mean, obviously there's a way to do that, but you're at a loss because you don't know any theory or anything. You don't know. Someone like me doesn't know as many musical terms, so I can't deconstruct. I can't very well transcribe it. So all of my commentary is just kind of be fluff because it's I'll say like, oh, I like how the album was cohesive and it was brief and the ideas played out. Like all that's kind of to me it's unsatisfyingly vague, and I wish there actually a means of transcribing the music to see what it did. But then the problem with that is that would be really time consuming, and in order to compare it and find out its relevant spot in the history of music, I would have to transcribe a whole bunch of other songs to figure out who was doing what in those precise terms. And it just makes me kind of sad. And I think that's kind of the state of criticism in rock music as a whole. Whereas classical music doesn't really have as much of a problem with that, because with classical music, you know what everybody did. Because there was no recording industry, you had to write down your composition to be performed by performers. So you had to actually have it precisely delineated. Whereas with your band might not even read music, and it's probably not going to publish the music anyways, because you're probably coming up with all kinds of stuff on the fly and making it really complicated on the fly without being arsed to write it down in precise notation. So in the modern era, rock criticism has always been kind of vague because of the nature of modern recording technology has allowed you to express what your composition is without writing it down anymore. And the downside to that is that we are less able to figure out who actually gets credit for, originating certain themes or concepts in the music, because it's all kind of visceral. Like all these rock critics, if you look at Robert Christgau, even Scaruffi himself, even though Scaruffi tries to rate more based, if you look at his actual commentaries, they're all very like wishy-washy. Christgau, Scaruffi, Anthony Fantano, who's a critic on here, they all sort of struggle to pinpoint concretely where things are. So then a lot of rock criticism is just based on they serve a function, and how much would an average person, a typical person buying this record, enjoy it, instead of like who's really doing something new, because that's too hard to pinpoint with how things are. But yeah, I mean, it's still fun to talk about it that way though, so I'm not going to stop.
I actually got into an argument once with my friends over this sort of information, and it was Lane, actually, because one time we were sitting it was in high school, so it was almost over 10 years for me, and Lane said, you should check out this band. And I was like, oh, what genre are they? What do they sound like? And he got really mad. He was like, it doesn't matter. Just listen to them.
Yeah.
And it's such a good point. Like, I didn't see it back then because it was 10 years ago. But now I totally see where he's coming from, especially when I listen to like post-hardcore music. which I don't know. I don't think you listen to at all.
A little bit. I mean, no, I've listened to some post-hardcore.
So it's like A Day to Remember, and then A Plea for Purging is more like a prog rock, not prog, gent, I think is what people call it nowadays.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people, when you show them that kind of music, they're just like, oh, it's just screamo. And that's just almost a dirty umbrella term
Yeah, yeah.
that almost means nothing. But there is a genre of screamo. It does exist. It's like high-pitched screaming, which is a little weird.
In high school, I was kind of guilty of that. I guess there is something to be said for trying to see different things in music than what you're used to, and kind of seeking out innovation and kind of giving it a chance, even if it sounds unorthodox and even crappy. There's a kid in my high school class who knew about all sorts, and he really liked, and I would just have called it like screamo or whatever, and I thought it sounded like garbage because I used to only like vocals that sounded pretty traditionally good. So like someone like Freddie Mercury, that's a good vocalist, whereas someone from any sort of metal outfit was probably not very good, with the exception of maybe Bruce Dickinson. And one criticism I had of his music was like, you can't even hear the lyrics, which I obviously don't subscribe to that anymore. Like, and because I kind of listen to more and more music, I came to view the vocals in that type of music, even the gruffest, like pig growl vocals, like it's just another instrument. Who cares about the lyrics?
Right.
Lyrics don't even matter. It's just kind of like another background instrument. Because I can still hardly ever understand the lyrics, no matter how much of that I listen to. But it's just
like post-hardcore.
Not just post-hardcore. I'm talking about like crazy, incomprehensible lyrics, like grindcore or something that Cannibal Corpse would write, or something like that, or like technical death metal or stuff like that. It's just another instrument. It's kind of how I view it. It's like a texture of human voice that's not, whose point is not the lyrics, and that's when I kind of revolted against lyrics, I guess you could say, is because I ended up kind of thinking they were meaningless.
I actually had almost a similar experience. One time I left an album in my car. Oh, I wish I could remember the name of the band, but it's a post-hardcore band. And the album, they're actually a very Christian band, but all their music is about actually burning down churches, but still worshiping God. So a lot of the songs are like bow down worship, but it's like screaming it. And my mother got in my car to move it out of the driveway, and that started playing.
Yeah.
And you know, she got really mad. She's like, "Are you listening to like devil music? Like, how can you stand that stuff?" And the really easy argument was, it's just like another rhythm instrument. It has nothing to do with melody. It's like a drum, like another drum.
Yeah.
And she completely accepted that, and it was because I was a drummer in high school from like 5th grade to graduation, and so rhythm was kind of the big thing for me.
I know there's kind of Christian bands like that, like August Burns Red. It's actually a pretty decent outfit that
They are good.
They would play that kind of stuff.
I've seen them live. They're very good. Do you know the story behind their name?
I thought, and this is what that same friend from high school told me. He told me the origin behind their name. I never got super into them, but he was super into them, and he said that one of the band members' girlfriends had a dog named Red and a girlfriend named August, and then August burned Red.
Yep.
Yep.
They like broke up, and then she burned the dog. I believe it even died. And the newspaper headline, at least this is the story I heard, the newspaper headline for the next day was August burns Red. It made like a local newspaper.
Huh.
I thought that was a really cool story. I mean, it's a really horrible story. Like, when I first heard it, it made me really mad. But
yeah,
that's what it is. That's definitely, back to the talk of genres, you have to be careful so much. And I can definitely see genres annoying artists because
they try to create something, and then a critic might try to frame it as being like insignificant if you take it within the context of this genre, but they're totally missing the point.
Yep. There's one band I listen to a lot is a band called Ninja Sex Party, and one of the singers, which was Danny Sexbang, which his real name is Lee Dan Avedon. When he was talking about when he first made the band. It was him and one other guy, Brian Wecht. Mm-hmm. And Dan goes up to him and he says, "Okay, so what genre of music are we going to play?" And so Brian was like, "Oh, what do you mean? We're going to play whatever. If I stuck to one genre, I would get so bored of a band so fast." And there's a song, not by them. This is a different band. I believe the artist is Seal, and the E is a 3 because he's one of those new age dubstepper kiddos.
Yeah.
He has a song called Genre Police, and the whole song is about this police force ruining your fun because you're not categorizing your songs properly.
But yeah, I wouldn't get too carried away with the genre deconstructionism, though. There's certain cases of great albums that kind of carve out their own place, and like important albums that carve out their own place. But let's be real, some albums are literally just cookie cutter within a framework that absolutely has been beaten to death. Let's not kid ourselves about that either.
Yeah, that is very true.
In fact, probably around 80% of albums are just like, oh yeah, this is this, and it literally is that. And then 20% of them are like, oh, well, I don't know about this. Like, what is this really? But I'd say, yeah, 80% of things I've listened to, it's like, oh, that falls hook, line, and sinker right into all these tropes. And it's inescapably. And not even necessarily bad albums either, but it's like, yeah, this is inescapably a metal album, or this is... And they can even be innovative. But... let's not, and you can even have bad albums that don't fall within a distinct genre, but are still bad because they still repeat overdone tropes from different genres to death. You know what I mean? So it's all kind of, you have to disentangle all of that from each other too.
Yeah, that's definitely. It's so interesting when a band like innovates. Like, I don't know. So one of my favorite bands in high school was System of a Down, and I don't know if they were the innovators, but they were a genre called nu metal.
Yeah, nu metal is, I think, kind of started by Korn, and those people, maybe Sepultura.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, like, why distinct it? Like, we kind of talked about how umbrella terms were kind of bad, but sometimes it gets ridiculous.
I don't know. I'd have to look into nu metal, but sometimes if you come up with partitioning terms, if anything, I'd rather actually make more labels to kind of cut up the umbrella labels and not just make it even broader and forget about labels at all. Know what I mean? Because it makes it more distinct. Genres are useful, it's just that you have to be careful with them, and they have weaknesses, and that you aren't they aren't precise. They're very high level. So I guess the way I can frame it is that the problem with genres is not that there are too many distinctions, is that it's that there are too few, if anything, right?
Right.
Because the more distinctions and labels that you make, the more precisely you can actually describe stuff. And I was kind of woeful, like, because if you have a genre tag, that's just going to be a genre tag. You can have a 1, 2, maybe 3 word description for a entire album full of stuff. Whereas if you really want to truly describe it, you just abandon genres altogether, but you'd replace it with something else that was 1,000 times more descriptive than genres, which would be like literal transcription of the composition into a type of sheet music notation. So the problem with genres is not that they're not that there's too many of them. It's that they're so vague, and it's actually from their vagueness that the labels get misused, and there's not enough labels in which to categorize things. Is kind of the weakness. Because detail in description would actually help those artists then, by not being so mischaracterized or thrown into a bubble where they don't want to be thrown into.
One of the worst genres that it's not even a genre. It's when people say pop music.
Yeah, that bothers me too. Like, what do they mean? Do they mean pop as as in popular? Do they mean, I don't know. And then there's like a million different types. That's one of those macro genres that's as useless as rock. And frankly, like jazz. Jazz is probably a genre that is kind of like a dead genre name.
When I hear pop, I definitely think of popular. And so a song's genre shouldn't change because it got old. Right? A popular song
that doesn't happen though. I mean, pop songs written by like Phil Spector, they're considered 60s pop. Beatles are considered pop. I think pop is actually mostly used as a designator for a certain type of accessibility of the music. There's certain tropes in pop. Pop has a distinct history. There are pop albums that are not popular, so it's not a contraction of the word popular when it's used. I think it has more to do with the melodic history of the genre. It is its own genre. But yeah, I think that's also what people mostly refer to. But I would say that it's kind of a dead umbrella genre in the same way that rock and jazz is, and same with classical music.
At least when I say classical and rock and jazz, I have like a vague idea of what you mean.
Yeah.
Rock.
So I would say that kind of what we're getting at with pop is that it's the worst umbrella genre.
Yeah.
But I would argue that it's the same type of thing, except like 10 times worse, because you have a very vague sort of perception of what rock is. Whereas with pop, you can be thinking of a few different things that people would not agree are in the same musical tradition, I guess.
Let's see. Any last things you want to talk about?
No, not really. We ended up talking about a broad swath of things related to the, like kind of meta reviewing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's good. I mean, that's perfectly fine.